Hello everyone, this is Ed Runkle, pastor at Tapestry Church, seen here weekly on LCTV channel 66, and you may see us live every Sunday morning at 10:30 at 22 Crady Avenue, and you're welcome here. Good morning everybody, so good to see you this morning. I'm glad you're here. Hey, have any of you guys heard the story about St. Peter getting ready for his annual 3-week vacation? Jesus volunteers to fill in for him at the pearly gates. It's no big deal, St. Peter explains. Sit at the registration desk, ask the incoming people a little bit about their lives, send them over to housekeeping to pick up their wings. Well, on the third day, a bewildered older man approaches the registration desk. "I'm a simple carpenter," says the man. "Once I had a son, a very special child, unlike any other in the whole world. He was born in a very unique way, and he went through an incredible transformation in his lifetime, even though he had holes in his hands and feet." His story is told all over the world. At this point, Jesus is standing with his arms outstretched and tears well up in his eyes, and he embraces the old man. "Father," he cries, "it's been so long." The old man squints and stares for a moment and says, "Pinocchio? That's bad, isn't it?" But I say, talk about a holy shift with an F. That's pretty bad. But I wonder if we aren't prone to some confusion about our identity. Prone to our own identity crisis, so to speak. To ask the question I raised on our church Facebook page the other day, how would you define yourself? How do others define you? And what about on your best day? Or how about on your worst day? I once heard someone say in effect that every problem we have in living, and especially in living a Christian life, is rooted in how we see God, which we talked about last week, and in how we see ourselves, which we're going to think about this morning. I'm going to read a couple of verses from the New Testament book of 1 Peter. It's a letter written by Peter, one of a number of letters written by Peter. And he's writing to folks who are experiencing a lot of serious persecution. And here's what he has to say. "But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy." And we'll return to those verses shortly, but I also want to read a couple of verses from the Old Testament book of Numbers in chapter 13. Well, let me give you some context first. Here's the context. The people of Israel have escaped their bondage in Egypt, and they're camped out in the wilderness of Paran when God asks Moses to send up men to spy out the land of Canaan, which he promises to give to the people of Israel. Upon their return, one of the spies, Caleb, says, let's at once go up and occupy this land. But here, picking up at verse 31, is what the others say. "The men who had gone up with him said, 'We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are.' So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land they had spied out, saying, 'The land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them.'" Those are a very interesting couple of verses. Because the Hebrew spies saw themselves as grasshoppers, the Nephilim saw them as grasshoppers. We often think that the way we see ourselves is determined by how others see us. But here, according to the writer of Numbers, just the opposite is also true. That is, the way I see myself will impact, even determine how others see me. If I think I'm a grasshopper, other people will see me as a grasshopper. If I see myself as a loser, other people will see me as a loser. And even more, how I see myself will impact to a significant degree my behavior, the way I act or react in life. I mean, instead of claiming the land God had promised to give them, Israel ran away into the desert like a bunch of grasshoppers. In other words, if I see myself as a loser, I end up to a large degree acting like a loser. If you see yourself as a victim, you tend to let people victimize you. If you see yourself as uncreative, you rarely come up with a creative idea. And, conversely, if you see yourself as successful, then you tend to repeat successes that you've had in the past. We set ourselves up. Our beliefs impact our behavior. We'll live consistently with who we believe ourselves to be. The way we see ourselves, whether we see ourselves as God sees us and believe about ourselves what God says about us, influences every area of our lives. In fact, for instance, many of us will not allow ourselves to be fully known because we have a negative view of ourselves, which is often based on erroneous information we receive from misinformed and unauthorized sources. A guy named Eugene Peterson paraphrases what I read earlier from 1 Peter like this. He says, "You are the ones chosen by God from nothing to something, from rejected to accepted." I mean, most of us spend our entire lives trying to avoid rejection and earn acceptance. We seek it from our parents and peers and partners. We seek acceptance from the people we respect and the people we envy. Remember playing sports as a kid and dividing up into teams? Back in the day, it was usually the two best athletes, two best players would be captains, and they would choose up the teams. Does anybody remember this? I mean, this is kind of old school. But remember also, how you felt when the captains were choosing up sides. Remember how bad it felt when they got down to the last two or three and you still weren't chosen? Was anybody else always in that last two or three? Or how about this? Let me ask you this. Have you ever done something that won unanimous praise? Did that experience teach you what it taught me? That almost unanimous isn't worth a whole lot? The criticisms are far more memorable than the compliments, aren't they? I mean, isn't that true for everyone? It's like 99% of compliments can get swallowed up by one bit of criticism. Does anybody else kind of let other people's reactions to you impact your sense of self? That is, while the way we see ourselves impacts how others see us, the opposite is also true. If somebody doesn't like me or think I've done a good job, it hurts. I feel like a loser. Mostly I sense this passively. I just get angry or hurt or something. I'm not willing to admit that they're actually, affecting me. But on an honest day, I'll tell you the truth. Other people's opinions matter to me. In fact, they have the power to name me and tell me who I am. I mean, think about how our desire to be accepted can influence our lives, influence the kind of clothes that we'll wear, the kind of car that we'll drive, or the kind of home that we'll buy, even the kind of career we'll choose. It motivates us to project an image. I mean, when what people think about us, when that has a kind of significant impact on how we see ourselves, we become afraid, and so we try to control people and their perceptions of ourselves. And I mean, just think about that in terms of of Facebook. You know, Facebook allows us to curate an image of ourselves from just the part of our lives and personalities we wish to project. I mean, how often do you Facebook users see status updates that read, "Spent the evening alone again last night," or "Wonder if I'll ever be loved," or "Just manipulated my spouse to get my own way"? You don't see that many status updates that read like that. Or think about it like this. What classes I really hated in seminary? They were pastoral care and a clinical pastoral experience I did after seminary. And you know why I hated these classes? They were too touchy-feely for me, role-playing, talking about feelings and all, lots of that mushy language. It was just awful. I mean, it's obvious to me now that my dislike of pastoral care classes and that clinical pastoral experience, or CPE, that had everything to do with me wanting to avoid vulnerability. And, nothing to do with them being bad classes. It's just that for, much of my life, my MO has been to protect myself from being hurt and, appearing to be as tough and as strong as possible and never giving anyone an opportunity to see my witnesses, or never giving anyone an opportunity to actually know me. And I think on some level we all do this, and we're all continually trying to pretend some things about us are not true and other things about us are, in order to project an image and to keep people from actually getting to know us. Remember how the group calling themselves the Guardians of Peace, or North Korea, hacked Sony's computers, obtained a massive amount of private and internal data, and then released it to the public. You may remember also how the media had something of a field day sorting through it, kind of digging up the dirt and in effect, soiling the image of some of the stars and personalities associated with Sony. So now we know that George Clooney loses sleep over bad reviews of his movies, and that Angelina Jolie is a minimally talented spoiled brat, quote unquote, and that Tom Hanks checks into hotels as Johnny Madrid. I mean, it's hard to maintain an image. And in a day when, so much emphasis and so much pressure is put on us to esteem ourselves, I don't know how anyone can wake up with morning breath and pillow head and feel any self-esteem. At least I don't have to worry, deal so much with the pillow head anymore. But, that's not the sort of thing I want to put my faith in. Because our peace, our identity, our sense of self are not found in improving our image or having the fleeting pleasure of others' admiration. In fact, if our Facebook profile picture could be seen as a kind of metaphor for this, the Bible and some, the texts that we're looking at this morning are kind of like God tagging unflattering photos of us. Photos where our hair is a mess, or photos where our butt looks too big and one eye is half closed. And He says, in Christ, I choose you anyway. You're my people. I love you. I mean, the deepest cry of the human heart is to be loved without condition, no buts or footnotes. And the gospel of grace announces that we are. Holy shift. I mean, the Apostle Paul put it like this to a first century church in a town called Galatia. I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave Himself for me. In other words, being identified with Christ means full and free acceptance by God. The ability to approach a holy God, no condemnation, complete forgiveness, righteousness before God. So you know what? Holy shift. You can just be. And in just being, you can, in the fierce and loving eyes of God, be known. And even more, you can be whole. I mean, Peter's letter here, he's speaking to first century folks who in their day were considered to be nobodies. These are people who would have been thrown out of their jobs, Some of them thrown out of their homes, others thrown out of their families, others thrown out of their synagogues, all because of their superstitious belief in a crucified daydreamer. I mean, that's what the world thought Jesus was. See, when somebody's going through stuff like these folks were, and when I say stuff, I'm using it as a euphemism for another word that sounds like shift. When people are going through stuff, it's very easy for them to forget who they really are. I mean, when we have to evaluate who we are in the face of sudden change, tragedy, and the like, how do we keep our equilibrium? How do we remain centered and strong? Suffering in life can strip us of stuff, can it? Money, power, prestige, health, a loved one. Have any of you heard the expression, make your plans in pencil because God has a big eraser? Well, there's some wisdom in that. And some of you know this because you're there right now. Or some of you have been there in the past. You had plans, they were going to work out, but God took his big eraser and erased those plans. And it's like with those plans also went your sense of self. And so the question becomes, who are you now? Now that you don't have the financial resources you once had. Or who are you now that you no longer work at your former place of employment? Who are you now that you can't exercise like you used to because of your age or your injury or your illness? Or who are you now that you've lost someone close to you? Pain strips us of the comfortable self-designations to which we so desperately cling, and when it does, who are you then? Because, what can happen is that we can begin to be defined by those failures or those losses. Like someone will say, I'm divorced. Well, divorce doesn't define you. Or someone is unemployed. Well, your employment status doesn't define you. Or I'm an alcoholic. Or I'm a senior citizen. Or I'm a, whatever. None of these, define us. I mean, did any of you happen to see, there was a story the other week of Stephanie Lucas of San Diego. I mean, she just wanted to take a bathroom break at work. But isn't it annoying when the toilet seems clogged and you have to hold it in while you search for a plunger and then do your little hydraulic surgery on the porcelain throne? You know what would be more annoying? Realizing that the blockage was caused by a snake, a live 5-foot Colombian boa that's headed toward you. I mean, wouldn't you say that's a bit of a crisis? Or wouldn't that throw you off a bit? Here's what I'm trying to get at. The question of identity can really only be answered in a moment of crisis. When something throws us off, when something attached to our core is taken out of our control. Health, achievements, career, family life. Who are you when those things are altered or threatened? For me, personally, it's easy for me to begin to think that being a pastor is my identity rather than my calling. But I won't always be a pastor, and even more, if I let ministry become something that it should never be, my identity, or I look to it to give me that which it can never give, an inner sense of well-being, it will, produce all kinds of dysfunction in me, in the church, in my relationships. See, while the world and the enemy of your soul, or Satan, or whatever language resonates, constantly tempt you to locate your identity in something or someone smaller than Jesus, the gospel liberates you by revealing that your true identity is in Christ. It's locked there. Who you are has nothing to do with you. how much you can accomplish, who you can become, your academic or athletic prowess or lack thereof. Your identity is firmly anchored in Christ's accomplishment, not yours. Christ's performance, not yours. Christ's victory, and not yours. And so if you've accepted Christ's performance for you and on your behalf, then child of the Most High God is your cross-purchased identity. And in that, you can be whole. Holy shift. And you can be free. I mean, when I remember and believe who I am at my fundamental core, I'm free. I'm free to parent, for instance, without having to have my child's affection, to raise, to love, to adore, and to release, because my identity isn't mixed up in my parenting. Or I'm free to age with grace because my identity isn't rooted in my appearance or my physical capacities. Or I'm free to spend appropriately, to refrain from buying all kinds of stuff I don't need, because my identity is not tied up in stuff and in the capacity to purchase stuff, or I don't need to fill a hole in me. Knowing who you are will free you, and it will free you to serve. When you remember you're loved, you serve differently. When you remember you're loved, you love differently. When you remember who you are, you give differently. When you remember who you are, you live differently. I mean, this is why this letter to these dear people, many of whom experienced severe rejection and persecution, this is why it was written. They desperately needed to remember who they were. And you know what? You can tell, by a person's behavior and attitudes, whether they believe they're loved by God or not. I mean, it's a little scary to think that my behaviors and attitudes are so revealing. But you can tell. Reading through the New Testament book of Acts or reading through some of the letters of the New Testament, you can tell that Paul believed himself to be loved by God, because whatever happens to Paul, he's free. He's secure in who he is, in Christ. I mean, Paul went into a city and someone said, Paul, you can't preach the gospel in this city, otherwise I'm going to throw you in prison. Paul said, great, I'll preach to the prisoners. It doesn't matter. The guy said, I'll throw you into solitary confinement. You can't be around the prisoners. Paul said, great, I'll pray for you. And I'll pray that God shakes this city and does some crazy things. The guy says, Paul, I'll have you put to death. And Paul said, great, I get to be with God. I don't care, have me put to death. I mean, you can't mess with Paul. You can't kill him. You can't discourage him, because his life, his identity, his sense of self is built on Jesus. In the, Paul's in prison, and the gospel is advancing. Other people are sharing the gospel. This wasn't his original plan. He wanted to go to Rome, hang out in people's homes, preach the gospel, have a good time, then go to Spain and do the same thing there. But God had a big eraser, like I mentioned a few moments ago. God had a different plan. Paul's prison became his pulpit, and he's reaching people he could never have reached with his original plan. I mean, the Imperial Guard aren't guys that would kind of stroll into church and hear the gospel. These are rough guys. They're hearing the gospel because God placed Paul in the right spot, and because Paul was free, regardless of his circumstances, secure in his sense of self and life purpose. In the heart of Manhattan, in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, hangs a famous painting of the 16th century Spanish artist El Greco. And the painting's titled The Vision of St. John. It was completed in 1614, but looks like it could have been painted in Paris in the early 20th century. It has not only a modern, but kind of a contemporary feel. The painting as we view it today, however, is only a fragment. You should Google this. I'm sorry I don't have it to show you. The canvas that hangs in the Met doesn't tell the whole story. In the course of a restoration project done around 1880, the unfinished canvas was trimmed, and get this, by at least 68 inches, or almost half the original painting. In the name of improvement, the scene is truncated by almost half, literally leaving God out of the picture. And so in what seems a fitting parable of our day, the exultant arms of the Apostle John reach upward to nothing, to the top of the frame, to the edge of the canvas. There are martyrs in the painting with him that seem to be receiving gifts from nowhere. And John seems to be praising the non-existent. All of them seem to be looking for something no longer there. Here's what I'm trying to say. I think our world, our culture, in effect, has trimmed the frame. And we no longer see that there's so much more to the beautiful portrait of who we are. But holy shift, when we do, when we see that God is the source of our identity, we can just be. And in just being, we can, in the fierce and loving eyes of God, be known. And even more, we can be whole and we can be free to live and love and serve for heaven's sake, to, like God, bless those around us not on the basis of how the world values them, but on the basis of how God values them. May it be so. Wouldn't it be something for it to be so? Thank you for joining us at Tapestry Church this morning. We hope you enjoyed the message. For more information, you may check out our website or Facebook page, and you may see us live weekly at 22 Crady Avenue at 10:30. All are welcome.